The call came at 7:43 a.m. on a cold Tuesday morning, exactly 6 months and 8 days after they restructured my position at Vulcan Steel. Stefan Reinhardt, a senior due diligence compliance auditor with Eisen Industrial, spoke with a heavy German accent, his tone formal but polite. "Mr. Higgins, we have discovered a significant problem with Vulcan Steel's Clean Air Act, Title V operating permit compliance status. Are you available to discuss this matter with us?" I was sitting at my small oak desk in my office above Cooper's Pub on Liberty Avenue, watching the morning sun cut through the gray fog rolling off the Monongahela River. The rusted metal smokestacks of the old steel district stood like silent sentinels against the Pennsylvania sky. 6 months earlier, I had been Vulcan's chief environmental compliance officer. Now, sitting with my mug of black coffee, I was about to find out that they had made a $285 million mistake. My name is Donald Higgins. I am 55 years old, and I have spent the last 10 years keeping major steel manufacturing plants legally compliant. Before entering the corporate world, I spent 16 years in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. In the military, my job was supervising the structural integrity of locks, dams, and concrete channels in the Ohio River Basin. The principle was the same, whether you wore a uniform or a hard hat. A single hairline crack, if ignored, would eventually bring down the entire structure. When a dam fails, communities are flooded. When environmental compliance fails in heavy industry, corporations bleed out in courtrooms. I remember the day that started this disaster. It was a cold Tuesday morning during our quarterly safety and compliance review. Brandon Croft, the newly appointed Vice President of Digital Optimization, walked into our conference room. He called my compliance team legacy operational friction with outdated overhead. I knew right then that Vulcan Steel was heading for a collapse. Brandon had that insufferable entitled MBA energy that seems to plague modern offices. He wore a tailored suit, an Apple Watch, and possessed the kind of absolute confidence that only comes from never having failed at anything that actually mattered. He was the nephew of our CEO, Howard Croft, and had been given a fancy title in a 98-year-old steel company, despite having no practical manufacturing experience. He did not shake hands. He just gave finger waves, sipped a $15 organic green smoothie, and talked about disruptive innovation, as if he had personally invented corporate efficiency. Nobody asked Brandon to present that morning, but nobody had the courage to stop him either. He clicked through a slide deck titled Streamlining Legacy Functions, Phase 1. It did not take long to realize that Phase 1 meant destroying my department. I had been Vulcan's designated Title V compliance officer for a decade. That was 10 years of building emissions tracking protocols, watching environmental regulations change like sudden storms, and documenting every safety check. I had guided the company through 4 external federal audits with 0 violations. My filing cabinet was organized with military precision. Brandon, however, did not even know what a Title V permit actually was. I watched him secretly search for the term on his phone during the meeting. That morning, he stood at the whiteboard, grinning. Armed with his uncle's corporate credit card, he declared compliance a redundant support function. He proposed automating our entire environmental oversight using generic AI software. My department was redundant, he claimed, eliminating my $72,000 salary in 10. $500 in health and pension benefits would save the company exactly $82,500 annually. Someone from the marketing department actually clapped. I did not say a word. I just capped my fountain pen, closed my leather notebook, and asked, "Are we finished here?" Brandon gave a smug little nod. He left the room with his spreadsheets, feeling victorious. I went back to my office and opened a new binder. It was not out of anger or surprise. It was simply protocol, a military habit. When you see someone preparing to walk onto a minefield, you document every step they take so the recovery crew knows where to dig. I began downloading files. I backed up every access log, every regulatory registry entry, and every single permit where my name was listed as the sole authorized signatory. Most executives at Vulcan did not realize that our entire federal operating status depended on my personal license. Every quarterly emission filing and safety manifest required my signature as the certified responsible official. No backup had been trained. Nobody could replace me without formal board approval and a registration update filed with the EPA within 21 calendar days. Brandon did not know this, and his Uncle Howard was too busy looking at merger spreadsheets to notice. I waited for someone to halt the process. I thought the HR director or the legal counsel would raise a red flag, but nothing happened. The formal demotion paperwork arrived 4 days later. My new title was Senior Administrative Coordinator. My security clearance was restricted, and my invitations to leadership meetings disappeared. I accepted the change without a single complaint. I even congratulated Brandon on achieving his first operational savings target. He gave me a thumbs up and called me Donnie. I printed the original board resolution from 2019 that designated me as the certified responsible official and sent a time-stamped copy to my personal email. Then I made 2 printed copies. One went to my safe at home. The other went into a black binder labeled Title V Regulatory Continuity, Archive Only. I walked into the legal archives room and placed it on the 4th shelf, left side. I did not tell anyone. The transition from running a critical department to sitting in a windowless corner was jarring for most people, but my military training had prepared me for worse. My new desk was in a former storage closet on the 3rd floor. Next to the freight elevator, it smelled of floor wax and hydraulic fluid. My tasks were reduced to filing invoices, sorting paper records, and entering data into legacy spreadsheets. Brandon Croft had successfully removed me from all operational workflows, which was exactly what I wanted. He thought he was isolating me, but in reality, he was isolating the company from its own legal shield. Under the Clean Air Act, specifically 42 U.S.C. 7413, major industrial facilities are subjected to strict regulatory oversight. Vulcan Steel operated 3 electric arc furnaces that processed scrap metal into structural steel. This process generated significant emissions, including particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides. The federal government mandated that all such facilities maintain a Title V operating permit. This permit was not a generic business license. It was a binding legal agreement with the Federal Environmental Protection Agency and the State Department of Environmental Protection. A key element of Title V compliance was 40 CFR 70(2), which defined the role of the responsible official. This individual was personally liable for the accuracy of all compliance filings. Every stack test report, every continuous emissions monitoring log, and every semi-annual compliance certification had to be certified by the responsible official. I sat in my chair and stared at the gray concrete blocks of the wall. The hum of the freight elevator was a constant reminder of how low the company had fallen. I remembered how we had spent 6 months preparing for our last state audit, checking every flow meter and calibration log. I had cataloged every single valve on the gas recovery lines. Now all that expertise was being swept aside by a vice president who believed that a standard software template could predict equipment failures. The lack of understanding was almost funny. In heavy manufacturing, compliance is not about ticking boxes on a computer screen. It is about understanding the physical limits of the machinery and ensuring that the safety valves work when the pressure spikes. I had been that designated official for 10 years. My personal signature was registered with the federal database. When Brandon demoted me, he did not consult our legal counsel, nor did he read the company's business continuity plan. In 2019, after watching a competitor in Ohio get hit with a $3.8 million fine for an invalid compliance handoff, I had drafted Section 12.3 of our continuity plan. It was clear and unambiguous. Any change in the designated responsible official must be authorized by a formal board resolution and submitted to the EPA and state DEP within 21 calendar days. If no new responsible official was registered within that window, the facility's Title V operating permit certifications would become legally invalid, retroactive to the date of the vacancy. The daily fine for operating a major source without a valid certified responsible official was $8,000, escalating to $25,000 per day after 90 days of continuous non-compliance. I sat in my closet office and watched the calendar. The 21-day window closed on a Friday. No board resolution had been drafted. No filing had been sent to the EPA. Brandon was too busy presenting slides to the executive board about his digital transformation. Howard Croft was celebrating the reduced operational overhead. They had saved $500 by removing my position, but they had opened a financial abyss right beneath their feet. On day 42, 6 weeks after my demotion, I handed in my resignation. It was brief. I am resigning from my position as Senior Administrative Coordinator, effective in 14 days. Howard did not even look up from his computer. He just nodded, muttered a brief thank you, and signed the paper. My final day at Vulcan Steel was a quiet affair. The IT department disabled my email access, but because Brandon had rushed the process to show immediate savings, the security team forgot to update the federal database. My name remained on the registry as the active, responsible official, even though I was no longer employed by the company. That evening, my son Toby called me from his dorm room at Carnegie Mellon. He was in the middle of preparing for his junior year exams. "Dad, I heard you resigned," he said, his voice laced with worry. "What about the tuition payment for next semester?" "Don't worry, Toby," I told him, keeping my voice steady. "Your old man has spent his entire life building safety systems. I have built a solid contingency plan. Sometimes you have to let the concrete cure before you put weight on it. Focus on your exams." Toby sighed, but he trusted me. He knew I did not make reckless decisions. The next morning, I drove down to the federal building and submitted a formal update to the compliance registry. I marked my status as executive designation relinquished, no replacement filed, effective on the date of my departure. This document was time-stamped and entered into the federal database. The clock was now officially ticking for Vulcan Steel. I then went to the county clerk's office and registered my new consulting firm, Higgins Compliance Partners. I rented a small office above Cooper's Pub on Liberty Avenue for $900 a month. It was a simple space with 2 desks, a file cabinet, and a window that overlooked the river. I bought a second-hand desk and a coffee maker that worked about half the time. It was a far cry from my old office at Vulcan, but it was mine. I was no longer a legacy cost center. I was an independent consultant, and I was about to become very busy. I walked down to the local hardware store, bought a notebook and some files, and began structuring my corporate strategy. I knew that the steel market was tightening, and companies would soon need real compliance expertise, not digital slides. The transition to running my own consulting firm was surprisingly fast. The compliance world is small, and when a veteran officer with a spotless 10-year record suddenly becomes available, people notice. Within 48 hours of updating my status on the Federal Registry, my phone began to ring. My first client was a metal fabrication plant in eastern Ohio. Their compliance director had retired, and they were facing a surprise audit from the EPA. They needed someone who could reconstruct their emissions records and represent them during the inspections. I quoted them $275 per hour, plus travel expenses. They agreed without hesitation. I spent 2 weeks in Ohio, organizing their files and guiding them through the audit. The plant was a sprawling facility with aging equipment. They were facing potential violations under 40 CFR 60 Subpart A, which governs performance standards for electric arc furnaces. I spent hours analyzing their continuous emissions monitoring data and found that the apparent spikes were caused by a faulty oxygen sensor rather than actual excess emissions. I filed an administrative correction with the state regulators, which saved the company from a $150,000 fine. We passed the audit with 0 major violations. The owners were so relieved they offered me a monthly retainer of $5,000 just to stay on call. Every morning when I was in Pittsburgh, I would walk downstairs to Cooper's Pub and get a cup of coffee from Barney. Barney was 68, with thick gray hair and a permanent smile. He had run the pub for 35 years, serving steelworkers, lawyers, and river barge captains. We would talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers, the changing weather, and the decline of the old mills. One morning, Barney saw me reviewing a stack of federal regulations. "Donnie," he said, leaning against the bar. "My grandfather worked the open hearth furnaces at the old Monongahela Works. 43 years, he never missed a shift. When they finally closed the gates, he told me that the younger managers always thought they could run the furnaces hotter and faster without checking the foundations. He said they always forgot that the furnace is a beast, and if you do not respect it, it will eventually burn you down." Barney's grandfather was right. Brandon Croft was running Vulcan Steel hotter and faster, completely ignoring the foundations. On day 22 of my absence, the grace period expired. Vulcan Steel was officially in violation of the Clean Air Act. Because no new responsible official had been designated by the board, all quarterly emissions reports, fuel quality certifications, and hazardous waste manifests submitted by the company were legally invalid. The daily fine of $8,000 began to accumulate. By day 60, the invisible penalty stood at $320,000. By day 90, the violation crossed into the escalating penalty phase. The daily fine jumped to $25,000. The liability was growing like a cancer, completely hidden from their balance sheets. Meanwhile, Vulcan Steel was preparing for its biggest milestone. Howard Croft had spent 2 years negotiating a merger. A massive German steel conglomerate, Eisen Industrial, was looking to establish a footprint in the American mid-market. They had agreed to acquire Vulcan Steel for $285 million. The news was announced on the front page of the Pittsburgh Business Times. The article included a photo of Howard and Brandon, both smiling in front of the main furnace. Brandon was quoted extensively, claiming that his digital transformation and the elimination of redundant legacy support functions had made Vulcan the most efficient mid-market steel manufacturer in the region. He boasted about saving the company hundreds of thousands of dollars in administrative overhead. I read the article while sitting in Cooper's pub, drinking my morning coffee. Barney looked over my shoulder at the paper. "Looks like your old company hit the jackpot, Donnie," he said. "They might think so," I replied, "but you cannot build a steel structure on wet sand. Sometimes the tide comes in faster than you think." My own business was thriving. I had taken on 3 more clients, including a chemical processing plant in West Virginia that was struggling with toxic release inventory reports. They had misclassified their waste streams and were facing a massive penalty under the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. I restructured their documentation and filed corrected forms under the EPA voluntary self-disclosure policy, reducing their fine exposure to 0. They paid me $340 per hour for the emergency recovery. My monthly income had tripled compared to my old salary at Vulcan. I was able to pay Toby's spring tuition in full, and I even started looking for a larger office space. I spent my weekends reading regulatory updates, ensuring that my clients were protected from any potential legal issues. I knew that the due diligence process for a $285 million acquisition would be thorough. The German executives at Eisen Industrial were famous for their precision. They would not just look at the financial ledgers, they would audit the regulatory records. And when they did, they would find the binder I had left in the legal archives. 4th shelf, left side. The countdown was almost over. The due diligence team from Eisen Industrial arrived in Pittsburgh on a rainy Monday morning. They were led by Dr. Birgit Fischer, a sharp corporate executive with a doctorate in environmental law, and Stefan Reinhardt, a senior compliance auditor who had spent 20 years inspecting industrial facilities across Europe and North America. They set up their headquarters in Vulcan's main conference room, bringing with them a team of junior analysts, forensic accountants, and environmental specialists. Brandon Croft was in his element. He spent the first 3 days presenting glossy slide decks, showing off his digital dashboards, and boasting about his operational efficiencies. He proudly highlighted the $82,500 saved by eliminating my department, presenting it as a prime example of his modern management philosophy. Dr. Fischer listened politely, taking notes, while Stefan Reinhardt remained silent, studying the financial reports. On day 149 of the compliance gap, Stefan Reinhardt went down to the legal archives room. He was performing a routine verification of past operating permits, cross-referencing the physical files with the digital registry. He was not looking for a scandal. He was simply following his standard checklist. As he walked along the shelves of old binders, his eyes caught a black folder on the 4th shelf, left side. The label read, Title V Regulatory Continuity, Archive Only. Stefan pulled the binder down and blew the dust off the cover. He sat at the metal archive table and began to read. Inside the binder was the original board resolution from 2019. designating Donald Higgins as the certified responsible official. Next to it was a copy of the company's business continuity plan, with Section 12.3 highlighted in yellow marker. Stefan read the clause. Any change in the designated responsible official must be authorized by board resolution and filed with the EPA within 21 calendar days, or all subsequent certifications become void retroactive to the date of vacancy. Stefan immediately opened his laptop and logged into the Federal Compliance Database. He searched for Vulcan Steel's active filings. The database showed that Donald Higgins had relinquished his designation 127 days prior. No replacement had been filed. Every quarterly emission report, every hazardous material certification, and every safety log submitted by Vulcan Steel during those 127 days had been signed by Brandon Croft, who possessed no regulatory credentials and had never been authorized by the board. Stefan went a step further, checking the electronic signature certificates on the EPA Central Data Exchange. He found that Brandon had used my old login credentials to submit reports after my departure, a serious violation of the electronic document signature and certification rules. Under federal law, this constituted a fraudulent submission under the False Statements Act, 18 U.S.C. 1001, which carried criminal liabilities for the individuals involved and automatically invalidated the submissions. Stefan Reinhardt did the math. The first 90 days of violation at $8,000 per day amounted to $720,000. The subsequent 37 days at the escalated rate of $25,000 per day amounted to $925,000. The total direct liability was $1,645,000, and it was growing by $25,000 every single day. But the financial penalty was only the beginning, because the filings were invalid. Vulcan Steel was operating without a valid Title V permit, a federal violation that could lead to an immediate shutdown of their furnaces. Furthermore, they had represented themselves as fully compliant in the preliminary merger documents. This was a material misrepresentation of their regulatory standing, a legal breach that voided the terms of the acquisition agreement. Stefan immediately called Dr. Fisher down to the archives. He showed her the binder, the highlighted clause, and the Federal Registry logs. Dr. Fisher's expression turned cold. She instructed Stefan to schedule an emergency meeting for the next morning. She spent the evening discussing the findings with their legal counsel in Germany, confirming that the regulatory risk was too great to ignore. On Thursday morning at 9:15 a.m., the boardroom was tense. Howard Croft and Brandon sat on one side of the long table, surrounded by their legal counsel. Dr. Fisher and Stefan Reinhardt sat on the other. Stefan placed a blue folder on the table, slid it across to Howard, and asked, "Who is Donald Higgins?" Brandon Croft scoffed. "Donnie? He was our old compliance manager. We restructured his position months ago to eliminate administrative redundancy. It saved us over $80,000 a year." "Why do you ask?" Stefan Reinhardt opened his laptop and turned the screen toward Howard Croft. "Because Mr. Higgins was your designated responsible official under the Clean Air Act," Stefan said, his voice flat and precise. "And according to federal regulations and your own business continuity plan, his removal required a formal board resolution and a registry update within 21 days. You failed to file those documents. For the last 127 days, you have operated this facility without a valid responsible official. Every filing submitted during this period is legally void. You are currently facing $1,645,000 in retroactive federal fines, and your operating permit is invalid." Howard Croft's face went completely gray. Brandon stared at the screen, his mouth open, unable to speak. The room fell into a deathly silence. The company lawyers frantically whispered to each other, looking at the documents Stefan had provided. Brandon Croft tried to break the silence, his voice cracking slightly. "This is just an administrative oversight," he stammered. "It is just paperwork. We can resolve this in 24 hours. We will file the forms, designate a new officer, and move forward with the closing next week." Dr. Birgit Fisher stood up, closing her notebook with a sharp snap. "You cannot retroactively certify emissions reports under federal law, Mr. Croft," she said. "For the past 127 days, your company has operated in violation of the Clean Air Act. You have submitted invalid reports to federal regulators, and you have represented your company as fully compliant during our negotiations. This is not an oversight. This is a material misrepresentation of regulatory standing and a complete failure of corporate governance. Eisen Industrial cannot accept this level of liability. She turned to Stefan Reinhardt. Pack the files, she instructed. The acquisition is terminated, effective immediately. The due diligence team left the building by noon. On Monday morning, the press release was picked up by the business journals. The headline in the Pittsburgh Business Times read, Eisen Industrial withdraws from $285 million Vulcan Steel acquisition, citing compliance failures. The impact was immediate. Vulcan stock, which had risen on the news of the merger, plummeted by 33% in a single day. Major customers, realizing that the company's operating permit was invalid, began canceling their steel orders to avoid being caught in a federal investigation. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Howard Croft was forced into early retirement, his reputation in the Pittsburgh business community ruined. Brandon Croft was dismissed from his role as vice president of digital optimization. There was no press release for his departure. His LinkedIn profile was quietly updated to show he was exploring new opportunities. On Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Dr. Birgit Fisher. Mr. Higgins, she said, her tone professional but warm. We found your binder in the legal archives. It was a very thorough piece of work. It is clear that you understood the risks that the current management chose to ignore. Eisen Industrial is expanding its operations in North America, and we need someone to oversee our compliance framework. We would like to offer you a 16-month contract as Chief Compliance Director for our North American division. We will pay you $275 per hour with full operational autonomy to design and implement our compliance systems. Are you available? I looked out the window of my small office above Cooper's Pub, watching the river barges move slowly down the Monongahela. I looked at the coffee maker that was finally dripping a fresh pot. Yes, Dr. Fisher, I said. I am available. 6 months later, I moved into my new office on the 17th floor of the Eisen Industrial Building in downtown Pittsburgh. It was a spacious room with a view of the river and the hills. My first task was conducting a complete compliance audit of their 6 U.S. facilities. I hired Vance as my lead inspector and brought Brenda in to manage our administrative billing. Both of them received a 20% raise compared to what they made at Vulcan. Vulcan Steel was eventually delisted from the stock exchange. The company was broken up and sold for parts. A competitor from Ohio bought the furnaces, but the corporate entity itself was liquidated to pay off the federal fines and legal settlements. The old headquarters on the river was leased to a software startup, and the name Vulcan Steel was erased from the Pittsburgh skyline. Toby finished his junior year at Carnegie Mellon and secured a summer internship with a major environmental consulting firm in Philadelphia. He called me to share the news. Dad, they are using the Vulcan Steel collapse as a case study in my business law class, he said, laughing. The professor calls it the $285 million typo. I told him it wasn't a typo. It was just a case of someone not reading the safety manual. I'm proud of you, son, I said. Keep studying. There will always be a demand for people who know how to keep the fires burning safely. We had dinner that weekend to celebrate his internship, and we talked about his future career. That evening, I walked down to Cooper's Pub for a cup of coffee. Barney was cleaning the taps, but he poured me a mug and sat down across from me. How is the new corporate office, Donnie? He asked. It is good, Barney, I said, taking a sip. Can't complain. Barney smiled. My grandfather used to say that the man who knows why the furnace was built will always have a job. The man who thinks he can build it better without asking why will always be looking for one. I nodded. In my line of work, some people spend their entire careers trying to be seen. I spent mine making sure the emergency exits were unlocked. They did not replace me. They tried to erase me. But the system has its own way of enforcing the rules. Brandon Croft wanted to eliminate legacy friction. He forgot that friction is the only thing that keeps a train from sliding off the tracks when it enters a curve. Business is good. It just took them $285 million to figure that out. I finished my coffee, said goodbye to Barney, and walked out into the cool evening air, ready for the challenges of the new day.